I'll tell you, Max, I don't know why I ever leave this place. I've got all the company I need right here. Hello! Hello! How are you? How are you? I asked you first. Oh, that's really mature, saying exactly what I said. I'm an idiot! You're an idiot!
All right, fine. I'm not talking to you anymore. In fact, I'm going to whisper, so that by the time my voice reverberates off the walls and gets back to me, I won't be able to hear it.
You're an idiot!
So we see the Grinch here by himself. He says he's all fine by himself, but obviously he wanted someone to talk to. He obviously wanted someone to converse with, and even someone like him feels alone at some point. Even somebody whose heart is 3 sizes too small still feels alone at some point. And we've all felt like that. We've all felt alone, and we've all felt like we need someone to talk to. We just needed someone to do life with, even if we sometimes pretend like we don't. Some of us do. We pretend like we don't really need anybody. But there's an old song that goes like this. Some of you know it. One is the loneliest number that you will ever do. And he just keeps repeating that line and that phrase. And the chorus says this: it's just no good anymore since you went away. If you listen to that song and actually listen to the words, it's actually kind of sad. It talks about how he's alone and that since this person left, he's by himself. And everyone can relate to that. No one wants to feel lonely. We all want to have someone in our lives. We all want someone to share with. Now, some of us don't need to be around people as much as others, and that's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. An introvert is somebody who recharges by being by themselves. An extrovert needs to be around people to recharge, to get around them, and that's how they feel better. But there's a difference between being alone at the moment and being lonely. And the definition of loneliness is this: it's sadness because one has no friends or company. That means no one to call to share excitement with, no one to share sadness with, no one to do life with. You see, we can be alone yet not lonely because we have people that we can call or talk to anytime, but not everyone has that. You see, loneliness is a major, major issue. And it's exacerbated even more during the holiday time we see. Many people feel like they have no one that cares, no one to talk to. Even during these times, we may begin to remember loved ones that have passed away, and that makes us more sad because we begin to have these feelings of loneliness. And this time of year just brings back these memories, and it makes many people feel sad and alone. They just don't have anybody around that they can go to, that they can talk to. We all want to have someone because God has made us with this natural desire to have relationships. We want to be around people and talk to them because God has made us that way. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. But you might be thinking, how can anybody be lonely? There's people around all the time. Some people are like, I'm around way too many people. I want to be around less people. But like we have a room full of people, and yet here's the thing. Somebody sitting next to you might feel lonely. You see, it's not just being around people. You can be in the biggest crowd and be alone. Just a few weeks ago, I needed just to kind of be alone. I'm an introvert. I need to kind of be alone. So I went down to Springfield, and I was going to go see a movie. Before that, I had some time, so I started walking around in the mall. I can't even tell you the last time I was in a mall. And I was walking around, and there's a lot of people, but I was alone. Nobody was going to talk to me. Nobody was going to say anything. So you can be around people and still be alone or be lonely. It's all about the connections. It's actually kind of a strange dynamic we've seen over the last few years. People are connected now more than ever and know more about each other, and yet we see more and more loneliness. We don't have human interaction and face-to-face conversations, and while we might think we are connected, many people are just really kind of lonely. I mean, many of us have 400 plus Facebook friends, and yet not a single person that you can go to when you have something difficult to talk about. You see, that's what loneliness is all about. And maybe you feel like that, or maybe you do have people around you, but you still feel so isolated, still feel so alone, and maybe you feel like no one knows or understands you. And we can be in this position for many reasons. Maybe all the people that we were close to have moved away. Maybe some have passed away. That's one of the reasons we could be that. Maybe we just haven't opened up to anybody and we don't feel connected. That's why we feel lonely. Or maybe we feel alone because we don't have a relationship with God, or we have a relationship with God, but we feel like it's just one direction. It's just us to God, and we don't feel like God ever listens, that God doesn't really care. Maybe that's why we have these feelings. But the good news is this: we don't have to stay that way. You don't have to stay feeling lonely. And Satan wants us to think we're all alone. He wants us to think that no one cares. He wants us to think that God doesn't care, and if he did listen, he wouldn't care about our problems anyway. Our problems are small, and that's what Satan wants us to think. He wants everybody to think you are by yourself. You don't really matter. You don't really matter to God. That's what he wants us to think. And I believe that this issue of loneliness is actually an epidemic that is quietly sneaking up on society. That's why we're so isolated in our Facebook worlds, and we don't have human interactions, and we don't have real friendships that we can go to. It is sneaking up, and we're all disconnected, and when we're disconnected, Satan wins. You see, loneliness is pervasive, and it's a struggle that many people sitting right here in this room in a group of people feel. No one knows me. No one cares. Loneliness is all around us. And we're going to talk about what God says about this idea of loneliness and relationships. And first, we're going to start by going over a couple of basics really quick. And the first thing we have to know is that the idea and the foundation of relationships is God's idea. We are designed for relationships just like God. Genesis 1:26 says this: "And then God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Notice this one small word. It's just one little descriptor. The word is our. He says we're going to make them in our image. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know who our is. I don't know who God's talking to there. Maybe he's talking to the heavenly host. He's talking to angels. Maybe it's our because he's talking about the idea of the Trinity, the triumvirate nature of God. But he says we are made to be in relationship. He's going to make it in our image. God chose to manifest himself in three forms, and he shows us the nature of relationships: the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Here's the deal: God didn't have to do that. God did not have to be that way, but I believe that he made himself in these three forms to show us how important relationship is. How important it is for us to be in a relationship. God himself in his very nature is a relationship. You see, that's who God is. And it shows us how we work together and we need each other. It's symbiotic. And this relationship of the Trinity shows us complete unity. It shows us being one. It shows us about healthy relationships. It shows us different abilities, different personalities. It shows us what relationship is. God in himself is all about relationships. But see, God also knows that we need to be in relationships with other people. Not just with him, but also with other people. He realized that at the beginning. So right after he creates us in his image, in their image, Genesis 2:18 says this: "The Lord God said, it is not good for a man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Now here's the thing. Adam is walking and hanging out with God. So I literally have this idea of playing catch with God with some fruit they found laying around, all right? They are just hanging out, and it says he literally walked with God. And God says, our relationship's awesome, Adam. It's good. But I'm God, and you're a person. You need other relationships. God realized that we are not complete with just a relationship with him. We need a relationship with other people. It is not good for man to be alone. And that is not just husband and wife. That is for all of us in relationship. God says you got to be around other people. So for some of us, this may be difficult, but you know what? We really do need each other. And especially guys struggle with this idea. I don't need anybody. And they say it in that voice too when they say it. I don't need anybody. I'm a man. We'll get this taken care of. but God says, no, you do need other people. We need each other. So who is your group? Who are you doing life with? We all need a group. They help us. They support us during different times, and we help and we support them. We do life together because that's how God has made us. We need other Christians to help us grow and continue. We need other relationships with believers. I know for me, if I have an issue, I can go to any of the elders here or many other people in the church, and I know that they will give me good, godly wisdom and counsel. Here's why I need that. Because we all have times where we prefer to make worldly choices, and we don't want to go to people, and we often want to go to people who are going to agree with those worldly choices. Maybe you've been there. You're like, I really want to do this, but if I go ask this person, they're going to tell me it's a bad idea. So I'm going to go ask this friend, and they'll say that's a good idea. And often we want to do that, and so we need to be around Christians who are going to help give us God's leading, not what the world is doing. They'll tell us that, hey, man, you know what? That's probably not a good idea because God wouldn't have you do that. So we need godly relationships to help us navigate life. That's what God has said about relationships in a nutshell, right there, all that. We need a relationship with God. We need a relationship with people. But we may understand all of that and still feel lonely. I love how sometimes we'll talk about God and all these things, but what happens sometimes is just this knowledge doesn't fix my heart. I still struggle sometimes with feeling this. So we understand that about God, but I still might feel disconnected. Well, here's the cool thing about God. Because he understands these struggles, he understands what we're going to do. He didn't just talk about relationships, he shows us relationships in a way that we can understand. We get to see effective relationships in the life of Jesus, and this helps us prevent loneliness in our own lives. Jesus knew we needed to be in relationships, and he came and he modeled that. You see, Jesus came to model relationships. I mean, look at his life. His 12 was the most eclectic group you can imagine. He had a tax collector, which nobody liked. He had a bunch of fishermen that smelled like fish. Tax collector probably lived pretty nice. He's got his, then he's got the fishermen. I mean, think about all these different people that he has around them. He's got a zealot. You guys know what a zealot is. A zealot means that what that guy's doing, his job, is to actively fight and kill Roman soldiers. He is a fighter, a warrior. So one of them is a zealot. He's coming over there with Jesus. And then you have Nathaniel. And there's a verse about Nathaniel that I love. It says, Jesus says to him, he is trustworthy and honest. There is no deceit in him, is what Jesus says. So you've got Nathaniel, who is totally trustworthy. Yeah, and of course we've got the other guy, Judas. Judas is part of this group as well. Listen to this in John 12. This is so funny. One of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and money given to the poor? This is when they were going to anoint Jesus, one of the ladies did. It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. But that's what John wrote about Judas. So you've got Nathaniel, who's honest, never lies, and you got Judas, and this group is who Jesus hung out with. He hung out with a lot of different people. And yet Jesus interacted with them all, and he loved them all. He loved them, he taught them, he showed them God, he lived with them, and they did life together. You see, Jesus models relationship for us in his life. Now, it's funny that even though Jesus went out and lived, people still had a problem with it. Jesus could have come and he could have died and never had to be around a bunch of people. He could have been a recluse because it wasn't about who he was talking to. It was about him being the perfect sacrifice. He didn't have to live among all of these people. He could have had just a little small group. They could have had a little commune and done their thing, and he could have died, but that's not what he wanted to do. And people had an issue with the fact that Jesus loved people, that Jesus loved to be in a relationship with people. Luke 7 says this, for John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he has a demon. Now remember, John the Baptist lived out in the wilderness, and he had like camel hair clothes and ate locusts and crazy junk like that. And of course, if I saw a guy eating locusts, I'd probably say he has a demon as well. And so they said, this guy has a demon. Look, he's a recluse. He lives over here. But then it says this, the Son of Man, which is Jesus, came eating and drinking, and you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Jesus was around people, and no matter what he did, people gave him grief about it. He came to love people, to be in relationship But Jesus was going to show us living in connection with others. You see, it wasn't just the 12 that he modeled relationships with. We get to see how Jesus interacted all across the scale. I mean, we see what he did with the needy. With the needy, he loved them. He gave them what they needed. With the Pharisees, he taught and he pushed back on their legalism and their lack of love. When he had to deal with the kings and the rulers, he spoke truth boldly and he did not back down. With just the regular people, just the common everyday person, he loved them. He taught them about God's love and salvation. There's one guy that came to him, the rich young man, and what Jesus did was he loved him so much that he told him exactly what he had to do to get to God, to love God first. And Jesus cared enough to tell him the truth in a loving way. We see Jesus' relationship with the sick. Jesus loved them, he touched them, and he even healed them. Now, we may not be able to do that. You may not be able to up somebody and walk up and touch them and say, hey, you can walk now. That would be pretty amazing. If you have that gift, let me know. We'll take you to the hospital. And so, but what we can do is this. We may not be able to do that, but there's different types of sickness. It's not all physical. Sometimes there's emotional sickness that we deal with. And by choosing to care and choosing to love, maybe we can heal the emotional sickness instead. You see, Jesus navigated all these different relationships. So how did he do that? You see, Jesus seemed to have lived by this basic formula: grace, truth, and time. And I know you've heard me say it before, and you'll hear me say it many times. It is imperative in relationship building. And if you master this, you can master relationships: grace, truth, and time. And Jesus shows us each part of this. He obviously shows us grace and how he interacted with so many. We see that over and over. And the key takeaway is this: we start with an overabundance of grace. And we can have healthy relationships. When we are waiting for that inevitable slight or the inevitable issue to arise and we can't forgive or move past, then we will suffer from loneliness. Because we're going to continue to see problems. And every time we get in a relationship, we're just going to wait for them to do something. They're like, oh, I'm tired of them. You see, we got to have grace. Now, I'll be honest, I struggle with a lot of things. I share week in and week out how I've messed up. Last week I talked about not following what God has told me to do. But I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty good at this grace thing. I'm actually pretty good at it. I had someone say something or do something against me. I really don't even remember what it was because I don't pay that much attention to those things. And someone else pointed it out to me once. They go, didn't that bother you that they said that or did that? I was like, no, not really. I said, I'm not looking to be offended. I'm not looking for that. I know the other person, and maybe they're just having a bad day. And just because they say something, that doesn't mean that I have to own it, and it doesn't mean that I don't give grace. We don't have to own it. Somebody does something to it. We can give grace, and that's what Jesus does. You see, if we give more grace, it will help strengthen those relationships. Jesus was a grace giver in his relationships. But Jesus also gave truth. You know, Jesus just didn't go around telling everybody, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You know, it's all about just loving and just doing. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus gave truth. He spoke truth to everyone he met, but he spoke it with love. Now, if you don't get anything else out today, I want you to get this. Because this is going to help your relationships more than anything else, help loneliness. It's this. You see, Jesus gave a big helping of grace first, which makes the truth more appetizing. Jesus gave a big helping of grace first, and that always makes the truth more appetizing. And when we can be trusted to have God's best for others, then we can have deep, strong relationships. And God's best means that we are willing to discuss difficult things to help somebody else. We are more worried about the eternal than the temporary. That's what truth is. Jesus could have said to that rich young man, he could have said, well, you know, just give away a little bit of your money, or just follow me and don't worry about all that other stuff. But he told him the truth and said, this is what's in charge of your life is this. You need to get rid of it and put God first, because Jesus was more concerned about the eternal than the temporary. And for us to have strong relationships, we give grace and we worry more about the eternal than the temporary. I've said it before, I've got friends who, whenever I have something going on, they will speak hard truth to me because I know they care more about my eternal soul than they do about the temporary issues that we are struggling with. I can go to other people and get different answers, But I know that if I want the truth answer and I want what God would want me to do, that's who I can go to, and they give it to me. That's what truth is. And you know what? We care enough to be honest, even if it may cause problems. Even if it may cause problems. But if we give grace first, then usually the truth is received much better. Jesus always spoke truth with love and grace. And he did this at the right time. He acted immediately when it was needed. He talked in private on private matters, and he talked publicly when things were public issues. I love how Jesus dealt with the Pharisees. If they came and they made something a big issue in front of everybody, you know what Jesus did? He made it a big issue in front of everybody. He dealt with it publicly. If there was somebody that came to him privately and struggled, Jesus would deal with it privately. He did it in the right time and place. Rick Warren has said this. He said, you can be totally right in what you were saying and totally wrong in how you say it. And the same goes for our timing and location of what we say. Timing is a big part of having healthy discussions in relationships. And when we are bad at timing with important issues, we create barriers or we embarrass people. Do you know people who, whenever they see something, they just have to say something right then? And you're like, well, you could have waited till it was just the two of us. You didn't have to point out in the whole crowd that I've got something hanging out of my nose. You could have pulled me to the side. You know, you don't have to announce this in front of everybody. And there are people that are like that, but we create barriers and embarrass people when we don't do things in the right time. You see, Jesus gave truth and grace in the right way at the right time. So here's the thing. Why is this important to understand? Why does this even matter? Because he didn't just come to have a relationship with the people around him, but he came to have one with us. Jesus came to have a relationship with us. In this time of year, we hear this idea of Emmanuel. At Christmas, we sing songs, Emmanuel, and you've heard that. It's at the forefront. Here's what Emmanuel means. It means God with us. God with us. Emmanuel means God with us. And that is what he came to do, to be with us. I want you to think about this for a second. God, creator, the beginning and the end, all these other attributes and all these other names that you want to give to God, he came to be with us. I've heard it said before that religion is man's attempt to get to God and Christianity is God's attempt to come to man. And that's what it is. You see, God, the beginning and the end, the creator of the universe came to be with us. That is Emmanuel. That is how important relationship is to God. He says, I will come be with you. He didn't just save, but he brought us into relationship with him. And that's one of the reasons Jesus came, not just for salvation, but for relationship. It is so important. And when we're in a relationship with Jesus, this is what it means. It means we can talk to him. It means we can be upset with God. It's okay. I've been upset with God. God's a big God. I can't imagine that people have strong relationships here with somebody that they've never been upset with. I mean, if you've never been upset with your spouse and you've been married a long time, I'm going to have you come do our marriage banquet, all right? I want to hear about it. We're all going to be upset with people, even in relationships. And you know, we can be upset with God. That means that God loves us. And that means we have a living, growing relationship. And just like any other relationship, what you put into it and how much you invest it, that's how strong it's going to be. You have to invest in this relationship with him as well. So even if we are struggling with loneliness, we can know that we have a heavenly Father that loves us, that Jesus came to love us. Even if you're alone, you're not alone. You see, you think you might be, but God is there. We can have a relationship with him. That's part of what Jesus did. You see, Jesus came to put us in a relationship, but he also came to take us to his Father. John 14:6 says this. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. This is important because of the idea that we see we can go to God. We're now able to go to God's house. We can go and see him because of Jesus. We can become into his presence because the Son has invited us. We are now welcome without reservations. Think about this when you're a kid. When you're a kid, or maybe your kids, when they started to build a new friendship, they might invite their friend over to stay the night, or they might invite their friend over to eat a meal, right? Because now you are invited into the house because you are friends with us. When relationships get serious, you go and meet the family. I don't know how you had to go do that, guys. You had to go and meet the family, and that's always a big step. I'm going to tell you about the first time I met Christy's family. Yeah, I know. So I drove up to Christy's house in Stockton, a little ways away, and I go to meet her family, and we sit down to eat. First time I met their family. Now, I'm young. I'm insecure, all these other things, and I'm a little scared to meet her dad and to meet all these people. And so we go to eat. And we get chili, and we're sitting there to eat it. And I'm not going to lie, it was the worst chili I've ever had in my life. I can't even describe it without being gross. I mean, it was awful. But because it was the first time I'd met the family, first thing I thought to myself is, if this is the cooking we're going to have, this relationship is over. I will starve to death. But because I was scared to meet the family, and it was the first time there, I ate it. And I think I poured an entire bag of Fritos into the chili, and I began to eat it. After a few minutes, everybody began to look at each other, and they all began to go, this is really gross. What had happened was they cooked this chili in a crock pot, and evidently this grease had all bubbled up out of it. It had been there all day, and it settled back in. When I say gross, it was disgusting. I had already pounded down a half a bowl by then, though, because I want to make a good impression. I'm sitting here. Thankfully, at that point, everybody stopped eating it, even her dad. And they said, no, we're good. We don't have to keep eating this. I'm like, oh, my goodness. Thank you, Lord. It was disgusting. And my wife is an amazing cook, so that is not what happens at our house. But I was a little worried. But I got to meet the family because, you see, our relationship was taking the next step. Well, we're also there. I told my wife I was going to tell the story, but then she said, you have to tell this other part or I'm not going to let you. So while we were there, she had a trampoline. And their porch is sitting here, and the trampoline is right here on the side. And you can see right to the edge of the trampoline. And when I was younger, I wasn't very tall. And so I would do flips on the trampoline. It would have been a long time. And I'll be honest, I'm a guy. I'm trying to impress people. And so I'm on the trampoline jumping, and everybody's sitting on the porch. I'd forgotten that I'd grown a foot since the last time I'd been on the trampoline. And I jumped, and I did a flip. However, the trampoline went to here, and I went to here. And so I landed on the ground on my bottom. Her mom screams. This is the first time I've ever met him, because I'm just cool. And I'd land on, nobody could see me because of the porch. I'd land on the ground with a thud. Thankfully on my bottom, not on my head. And they thought I'd broken my neck. That's why they were all freaking out. And as you can imagine, great first impressions. Theirs on me and me on them, all right? But you see, our relationship was getting serious. And so we wanted to meet the family. I had to meet the family, and that's what Jesus does. You see, he came so that he can take us to meet the family. He says, I want you to get to the Father. I know the Father, and I want you to come and be with us because Jesus is all about relationship. Jesus came so we can meet the Father because relationship is so important to God that we can have a relationship with Jesus, and that makes us part of the eternal family. And when we have a relationship with Jesus, we get to meet the Father someday. We get to meet the Father someday. Now, you may be asking this, though. But what about right here? What about these relationships? How do I navigate them? I mean, I know God loves me, and I have a relationship with Jesus, and I know that I'm going to get to meet the Father, but God already showed us that we need human relationships. How do I go about not feeling so lonely? How do I go about dealing with these feelings of loneliness? Well, you see, here's the thing. We do have a choice in being lonely or not. We do have a choice in that. Now, you might not think so, and I want you to stay with me for just a minute. But as with most things, we play a part, an active part, in whether we are going to feel lonely or not. Now, we're going to have moments, and no matter how connected you are, we're all going to have moments. But for us just to stay in this long-term plan of feeling lonely, we have a choice. And I know we can't force people to be in a relationship with us. We can't force them to want to be around us. But what we can do is we can make other choices that do help the relationships. We can do things to help alleviate that feeling of loneliness. And the first thing we can do is this. We can choose whether we will be consumers or investors. We can choose whether we will be consumers or investors. You know how that works. There's always people in the relationships who are the givers, and the others are the takers. There are those who plan activities and invite, and then those that just wait to be invited to something. Now, here's the thing. No one thinks of themselves as a consumer of relationships. But many people are. Many people are. And you can tell if you are a relationship consumer by looking at your actions. Do you initiate interactions? Are you the one who calls or plans something? If you never initiate, then you have no reason to complain about being lonely because you haven't done anything about it. You haven't even tried. We get to choose whether we will invest in relationships or not. I have people that come in and have talked to me, I'm lonely. I don't have anybody. I'm lonely. But I very seldom hear that from people who are relationship investors. Most of them aren't lonely because they have made an intentional job of reaching out to people, so they are interacting. They have relationships. They're too busy preventing the loneliness from happening because of their habits. You see, there are always exceptions, but in general, if we invest in others, then we can control the feelings of loneliness. And that brings us to the next choice we have that helps prevent loneliness, which is this: we choose in whom we invest our time. You see, we get to choose not just what our time goes to, but who our time goes to. Your time is the biggest gift that you can give to somebody. You cannot get it back. You cannot make more. You get to choose in whom you're going to invest. You see, it's so important because that is important to remember because it affects our feelings of loneliness. And when we throw away our time on people who are constant consumers, then we aren't helping anyone. That doesn't mean we don't give. It doesn't mean we don't help. But what that means is we are careful about our long-term, strong relationships. The reality is we have to be judicious with what resources God has given us, and time is the most important one you have. Our time is an investment. And if someone just uses it without any positive outcomes, then we may need to use our time somewhere else. Let me give you an example. So I've done a lot of coaching. I've done a lot of individual instruction for kids. And I have parents that would pay me to do some individual instruction with their kids, but I would stop doing the instructions if the kids were not progressing and doing what they were supposed to be doing at home. You see, my time is too important. My time is too important to waste it on somebody who is not going to do their part in the process. And so if you are only pouring in to people who are constant vacuums for your time and attention, then you will feel lonely because they choose not to have a relationship. You can only give so much if they're going to be a constant consumer. You see, they are choosing to take. Now, there's a big difference between not being loving and giving and continuing allowing a relationship to drain you. There's a big difference. You can be loving and giving, but at some point you have to choose how much time you can invest in somebody who is a vacuum for relationships. And I guarantee, as I'm talking about this, you all know somebody like that. Now, maybe you're not in a relationship with them now, but you know somebody like that they are a relationship taker. And you see, here's the thing. The saying goes like this: it takes two to tango. You've heard that before. It takes two to tango, and it takes two to have a relationship. It takes both people investing in the relationship to not have one person feeling lonely. And one of the reasons that we have feelings of loneliness is that we are throwing away our time and energy into a bottomless well. They will never get enough. And it is sucking us dry, and we feel lonely because of what they're taking from us. You see, you get a choice. You can be loving and caring, but that doesn't mean that they are going to get that amount of time. You see, who we invest our time is a decision that will dictate what kind of relationships we will have in the future, and then that will dictate how we have, if we are lonely or not, if we have experienced this loneliness or not. But there are also some simple, basic cures for loneliness. Here's some basic cures for loneliness. Here's a very simple one. Even though it may seem very little, here it is. Okay, guys, some of you guys, we need to take this to heart. If you're feeling lonely, here's one way to help cure that. Don't give the leave me alone look. Very simple. What does your face say? I'm going to be honest. I've mastered this and I don't even want to. I have to remind myself to smile. I write down in my sermon notes, smile. I struggle with this. I get it. I know. But if you're feeling lonely, you have to smile. You have to look like somebody people want to approach. Proverbs 15:1 says this. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, I may be taking it out of context, but I think that goes not just for our words, but I think that goes for our demeanor. If we come across as kind and we come across as gentle, then we won't be putting up barriers to others. If we are seen as harsh, then we may end up being alone. People do not want to be around harsh, angry people. It hurts. It's scary. You never know if they're going to explode. You're on pins and needles. And I'm going to be honest, I don't want to be in a relationship with that. That's been a struggle in my family with my dad and my brothers and all of them. And we're not in a relationship because I don't want to be around that. I don't want to be around angry people. You see, people want to be around people who are caring or gentle. We don't want to be somebody that's going to stress us out. A friend of mine once said this. He said, if you are happy, let your face know it. I totally agree. If you're happy, let your face know it. Don't push people away by your demeanor. And I'm going to be honest, if we work on something that small and something that basic, this idea of loneliness is going to start to fade in our lives because we're going to have people that are going to want to be around us because we're gentle and caring. Another way to get through this is this. Get involved here at the church. Serve, go to small groups. There's ways to be intentional about building relationships. Get involved. Ecclesiastes 4:9 says this. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If you want to not feel lonely, join a small group or ministry team. When you're working together with somebody, you begin to build these bonds. Groups are awesome. Serving together, you could grow just as much, if not more, with other people. That loneliness goes away because you have some people you're doing life with. Those are great ways to get plugged in. This next year, we're going to have all kinds of ways to restore community. But be intentional. If you say, hey, you know what, I feel lonely, then do something. Go and talk to somebody. Like, look to help others. Be a friend. Be intentional about looking for others who may need someone to reach out to them. And I get it. It is difficult when you are feeling lonely or you feel like withdrawing. That's why this can be so tough, because when people are lonely, a lot of times you feel like, I don't want to step out. I don't want to go talk to anybody. Because that feeling is accompanied by this desire to be with people. But at the same time, we have fear or worry that we might be rejected, and that would make us feel even more alone. You see, it's this dual thing, and it's difficult to navigate because you're like, oh, I feel lonely and I want to be around people, but I'm scared that I'll be rejected and I'll feel even more alone. But the only way to get out of it is to be proactive. I'm going to tell you something, and you may have heard this before. If not, take it to heart. You are responsible for your own spiritual and emotional health. You are responsible for that. I am not responsible for your spiritual health. Nobody else is responsible for your spiritual health. You are responsible for your spiritual health. You are responsible for your emotional health. And so you have to be proactive. And for those to be strong, you have to take the steps to get there. And that includes doing life together. Romans 14 says this. For none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. Here's the thing, it's all about eternal perspective. You were made to be in relationship. We don't live our lives alone, and an eternal perspective says we will invest in others, and then we will see that loneliness that we're struggling with will go away. And we will be doing it by investing in other people as well. And I know it's so difficult when you feel lonely and you feel by yourself. I know that is hard. But the only way that will change is if you choose to change it. There is no magic cure. When somebody comes in and talks to me and says, you know what, I just feel lonely, I start asking some questions. So, have you done this? No. Have you joined up with it? No. Well, have you done this? No. Okay, well, of course you feel alone. If I were you, I'd feel lonely too. Because of your choices. Because of the place you've put yourself in. And it's difficult. But the only way that it'll change is if we choose to change it. And no matter how tough we think we are, no matter how macho, we can't do life alone. We cannot do life alone. We need a relationship with God and a relationship with others. And I know some of us let our pride get in the way and we think, I don't need anyone. But that's not true. And you know why I know that's not true? Because God says it's not true. You might even think this, I don't need a relationship with Jesus. I don't need a relationship with him either. You see, I'm a good person. I'll get to go see the Father just because I'm a good person whenever I die. But Jesus says, no, you won't. There's only one way to the Father, and that is through the Son. You have to have a relationship with the Son to be invited into the Father's house. And we want to give you an opportunity to do that today. We want everyone to have a relationship with the Son to get to go see the Father. And to do that, we want to talk about getting on base with God. We do that every week. We want Jesus to be the boss of your life. That means he's in charge. And this is what I mean when we talk about getting on base with God. The B is to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. A is to admit that I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. And S is to surrender and say, God, you are in charge. And E is to express that in Christian baptism. And you can do that today. And that means you get to go to the Father's house. And I can guarantee you they won't have crock-pot chili. God said it's going to be a banquet. It's going to be a feast. It's going to be awesome. And we can do that when we have a relationship with the Son. But if you've already done that, then here's our homework for this week. Evaluate your relationships. Which ones do you need to pour more into? And also, which ones do you need to pour less into? You see, these decisions will decide if we will suffer from loneliness in the future or not. Because God has made us to be in relationship with him and to be in relationship with others, but we get to choose if we will be intentional about building those relationships. And if we are intentional, then we will not have to worry about the loneliness. Let's pray.